I created a fake cheating scandal to escape, then he uncovered a real one. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd fake evidence to ruin someone's reputation. But before you decide I'm irredeemable, maybe hear me out. Derek and I were together for 5 years. We met as junior associates in the same consulting firm, both of us too ambitious for our own good, both convinced we'd eventually make partner if we worked 70-hour weeks and never showed vulnerability. I think, in the beginning, that was what drew us to each other. He was driven, focused, charismatic in a way that made everyone else in the room feel about 30% less impressive by comparison. I loved that about him. Until I didn't. By the time he proposed, I was already halfway checked out of the relationship. I remember the night he pulled me into the conference room. Some big pitch had just wrapped up, and we were the last 2 people in the office. He dimmed the lights, handed me a glass of champagne, and started talking about how this was the next step in our mutual legacy. I think I actually dissociated for a second. Mutual legacy. Like we were 2 investment portfolios merging. I said yes because everyone was expecting me to, and because he looked so goddamn happy. But once I had the ring, the weight of it felt like a countdown. I realized, in all the talk of our future, I'd never pictured myself actually living it. But breaking off an engagement with someone like Derek is harder than it sounds. He was universally adored at the firm. His father was a major client. Our HR director had been his mentor. If I left him outright, the story would be that I'd been ungrateful or unfaithful. If I waited too long, I'd be locked into a marriage I didn't want. That's how I landed on the idea that if he looked like the one who betrayed me, I could walk away clean. No awkward speculation about my lack of feelings. No blame. Just sympathy. It started small. Late one night in November, I stayed after hours, under the pretense of working on a project. I knew Derek's phone passcode. It was the same as the last 4 digits of his college ID. He never thought to change it. I waited until he'd stepped out for a meeting and grabbed his phone off his desk. I only needed 5 minutes to export his text message history and email threads. I told myself I wouldn't actually plant anything in his records. I wasn't that cruel. But I could make it look like someone else had evidence. So I bought a cheap prepaid phone and created a Gmail account, Truthseeker219. Dramatic, but not so over the top that it would set off alarms. The first email was a test, subject, "You don't know me, but you deserve the truth. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I thought you should know Derek isn't who you think he is. He's been seeing someone from client services. If you want proof, I have it." I sent it to my personal address and waited. Even though I knew it was fake, my heart thudded in my chest when I read it back. It looked real. The phrasing was just right, concerned but vague. Enough to provoke curiosity without confirming details. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering scraps of circumstantial evidence. I booked a hotel room near the office on a date when I knew Derek was in an all-day strategy session, nothing to do with cheating. But I paid in cash and registered under a woman's name I pulled off LinkedIn. Later, I took photos of the reservation slip and emailed them to myself from Truthseeker219, claiming they'd been left behind. The messages were easy enough to fake. I used an online SMS generator to create screenshots of conversations that never happened. In them, Derek was promising to make time soon and saying he'd never risk the engagement, but he missed her. It was disgusting how quickly I got good at forging this stuff. When I finally sent everything to my own inbox, I stared at the files for an hour before I could work up the nerve to open them. If you'd looked at my face, you'd have thought I'd just found out he really was cheating. That was part of the trick, I guess, convincing myself it might be true, in some twisted way. I didn't confront him immediately. That would have seemed too eager, too rehearsed. Instead, I waited for the perfect moment, a Friday night after a client dinner when he was tipsy and relaxed. When he came home, I was sitting on the couch, the email chain open on my laptop, my eyes red from the tears I'd forced out. "Derek," I said, my voice shaking, "I think we need to talk." He froze in the doorway. The keys slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a soft metallic clatter. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What is this?" he asked, though his eyes were already scanning the screen. He had the kind of mind that was always 5 steps ahead, always searching for the angle, the inconsistency. I knew if I gave him too much time, he'd start to pick it apart. So I leaned into the performance. "I don't know." My voice came out thin and ragged. "Someone sent it to me. From this, anonymous account." I gestured to the email address, truthseeker219@gmail.com. They said you've been seeing someone in client services. That you've been lying to me. He looked back at the laptop. I saw the exact moment his gaze landed on the screenshots of the text messages. His jaw tightened. He swallowed once, twice, like he was trying to force something down. This is insane. He dragged a hand over his face. I swear to God, I've never sent these messages. Someone's trying to sabotage me. I closed the laptop. A carefully timed gesture, like I couldn't stand to see the evidence another second. I want to believe you, I whispered. But it looks so real. He reached for me, and I let him touch my arm before pulling away, just enough to make the rejection feel authentic. I could see the panic sparking behind his eyes. Derek was the kind of man who thrived on control, on knowing exactly how to steer any situation. And here he was, watching the story slip away from him. I don't know who would do this, he said, voice rising. What motive would I have? We're getting married in 3 months. I love you. I flinched like the word hurt. Another little detail for the performance. I don't know what to think right now, I said. I need time. He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, like he might argue, but then he dropped his hands to his sides and nodded. All right, he said quietly. Take whatever time you need. But please, let me prove this isn't real. Prove it how? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. But I'm going to find out who sent this. I swear it. That was the part one hadn't fully planned for. I'd assumed he'd be too ashamed to fight back, that he'd retreat into silence or try to fix things privately. But Derek never did anything halfway. If he said he was going to prove his innocence, he meant it. After he left, he said he was going to stay at a hotel. I sat alone in the living room, my hands shaking. Not from guilt exactly. More from the realization that I might have underestimated him. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls and a text, I'm hiring a cybersecurity consultant. This isn't going to stand. Please don't make any decisions until I can show you the truth. For a moment, I actually considered coming clean. Just admitting it was all a lie, that I'd panicked and done something unforgivable. But then I thought about what would happen if the story got out. How quickly the rumor mill at work would turn me into the villain. How his father, who owned one of our biggest accounts, could destroy my career if he decided I'd humiliated his son. No. I'd committed, and now I had to see it through. Over the next week, I did everything I could to look devastated without actually answering any of Derek's calls. I forwarded the emails to my personal lawyer, just to establish a paper trail that made me look like an innocent recipient. I told HR I needed to take a few personal days to process some troubling news. I let my boss, Karen, hug me in the break room and whisper how sorry she was that I was going through this. By the time Derek texted again, I'd woven a believable narrative around the entire situation. But that didn't stop the dread from curling in my stomach when he sent me an update. I think I know where this came from. It's a shell company registered in Belize. Whoever did this covered their tracks well. Belize. I'd chosen that jurisdiction because it was popular for asset protection companies, more plausible than some random country nobody had heard of. But hearing him say it out loud made it feel suddenly real in a way I hadn't anticipated. We're getting closer, he wrote. I'm not giving up. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen, my heart racing. If he kept digging, he might eventually find the receipt for the prepaid phone I'd bought. Or trace the email IP if he got the right expert involved. I had to find a way to push him off the trail, without looking like I was interfering. And I had to do it fast. The following Monday, I went back to work. I thought it would be easier to keep up appearances if I looked busy, surrounded by colleagues and deadlines. But from the moment I stepped off the elevator, I could feel the tension clinging to everything. People tried to act normal, but I caught the way conversations hushed when I walked by. Someone had clearly heard something, maybe just that Derek and I were having problems, or maybe more. I made myself smile and say good morning like nothing was wrong. It was incredible how fast I slipped back into my role, how practiced I'd become at hiding what I felt. I told myself it was just another performance. The same way I'd smiled through countless late-night meetings and pretended I cared about clients who treated me like a secretary. Karen, my boss, called me into her office around 10. She shut the door behind me, gave me one of her sympathetic looks, and gestured to the chair. I won't pretend to know all the details, she began, but I wanted you to hear this from me before the rumor mill gets too loud. Derek is telling people someone fabricated evidence against him. He thinks it's related to the promotion cycle. I felt my stomach twist. He's telling people at work? He's trying to get ahead of it. He says someone is trying to sabotage him professionally by making it look like he cheated. She paused, studying my face. He also said he's hired an investigator. I forced my expression into something between hurt and bewildered. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Karen said gently. Just, be careful. This could get messy if it spills into client relationships. That was the thing I'd been counting on. Nobody wanted scandal tainting their quarterly reports. If the situation started to affect business, they'd quietly pressure Derek to drop it, or at least keep it private. That was my best hope. I thanked Karen and went back to my desk. For the rest of the day, I fielded emails and tried not to look at my phone every 5 minutes. When I finally checked it at lunch, there were 2 missed calls and a text from Derek. I have something to show you. Please meet me. Just 1 hour. My heart thudded in my throat. I almost ignored it. But a tiny, reckless voice in my head whispered, if you don't know what he's found, you can't stay ahead of it. I texted back, where? He sent me an address, a cafe near our old apartment. Neutral ground. I made myself wait 20 minutes before I left. Any faster, and it would look like I was desperate. When I got there, he was already sitting outside, a leather folder on the table in front of him. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was messy, his shirt half untucked. The perfect image of a man who believed he was fighting for the truth. He stood when I approached. Thank you for coming. I don't have long, I said, folding my arms over my chest. What is this about? He opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. My investigator traced the emails to a Belize shell company. But here's the interesting part, there are transactions from one of Karen's holding accounts going to that same entity. I stared at the documents, willing my face not to betray anything. What does that mean? I asked. It means, he said, voice low, someone in this company is laundering money through that shell corporation. Someone with access to our internal directories and calendars. Someone who could easily plant evidence against me to discredit me before the promotions are finalized. It took everything I had not to look relieved. He was convinced it was Karen, or at least someone working with her. He'd gone down the exact rabbit hole I'd hoped he would. Derek, this is, I let my voice trail off, like I was too stunned to continue. This is serious. Have you told anyone? Not yet. I wanted you to see it first. He reached for my hand, and I let him hold it for just a second before pulling back. I swear to you, none of this was me. I have never cheated on you. I pressed my lips together. Even if you didn't, Derek, how am I supposed to look at you the same way? My trust is already gone. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I'm asking you not to give up on finding the truth. This is bigger than us. I looked down at the papers again. Part of me almost admired his conviction. He really did believe he was untangling some massive conspiracy. And in a way, he was, but not the one he thought. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I whispered. His shoulders sagged, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and closed the folder. I'll handle it, he said. Whatever it takes. As I walked away, my hands were trembling. Not from guilt this time, but from something closer to relief. He was never going to trace it back to me. Not if he kept chasing the wrong suspect. After that meeting, it felt like I was living in a split reality. At work, Derek was slowly morphing from the golden boy everyone trusted to the guy who'd gotten tangled up in some kind of internal scandal. Outside the office, he was still calling and texting, trying to convince me not to give up on him. I kept my responses vague. Just enough engagement to seem like I wasn't outright ignoring him, but never enough to encourage real hope. I need more time. I don't know what to believe anymore. I'm trying to process all of this. I didn't want to be cruel. But I also didn't want to give him the chance to get me alone again, to look me in the eye and force me to answer questions I couldn't. 3 days after our cafe meeting, Karen called me into her office again. This time, she didn't bother with the sympathetic tone. I'm going to ask you something, she said, folding her hands on her desk. And I expect you to answer honestly. My throat went dry. All right. Has Derek shared any of his investigations with you? I forced a frown. You mean the stuff about someone framing him? Yes. She looked almost tired, like she'd aged a decade since last week. He's been telling people there's evidence that I'm involved in money laundering. I let out a shaky breath. Karen, I don't know anything about that. He's only told me someone was trying to discredit him. She studied my face, searching for cracks. I'd rehearsed this in my head so many times I didn't even have to think about it. I need you to understand how serious this is, she said finally. If he keeps spreading these allegations, it could damage client trust. It could cost all of us our jobs. I understand, I said softly. I don't want to be in the middle of it anymore. She sighed, rubbing her temples. You may not have a choice. If HR launches an inquiry, they're going to ask you to make a formal statement about everything that's happened. My stomach twisted. A statement. That was the one thing I'd been trying to avoid. If anyone looked too closely at the timeline, at the phone records, there was a slim chance something would slip through the cracks. I forced a tear to slide down my cheek. I don't think I can do this, Karen. She looked at me for a long moment, then her expression softened. Maybe you should take some time off, she said quietly. Get some distance. That was the opening I needed. That might be best, I whispered. By the end of the day, I'd filed for 2 weeks leave. Officially, it was personal health reasons. Unofficially, it was the first step in my exit strategy. At home that night, I packed a bag and booked a short-term rental across town. Just in case Derek decided to come by unannounced. I didn't trust that he wouldn't. He called twice while I was packing. I let it go to voicemail both times. When he texted again, it was longer. I know you don't believe me, but please understand, I'm doing this for both of us. If Karen is involved in something illegal, you could be collateral damage. If you don't want to see me, fine. But at least hear me out when I have proof. I didn't answer. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of Slack messages from coworkers. Apparently, Derek had escalated things. He'd sent a report, complete with copies of the shell company transactions, to HR and our general counsel. That was when it hit me that this was spiraling faster than I'd anticipated. I'd expected him to keep digging, but I'd also expected he'd stop short of blowing it up publicly. By 10 a.m., Karen was on administrative leave pending investigation. Derek texted again, "This is it. It's all coming out. You'll see, I wasn't lying." He really believed it. He thought he was the hero exposing corruption. And in a twisted way, he was. Karen had been skimming funds for years, I just used her operation to cover my tracks. By lunch, the company had sent an all-staff email acknowledging the inquiry. They framed it as a routine internal audit, but everyone knew better. I spent the rest of the day in my little rental apartment, phone buzzing non-stop, heart ricocheting between relief and dread. I had to figure out my next move. That night, I drafted an email to my lawyer. I'd like to discuss resigning from the firm before this becomes public. Please let me know the best time. I read it over a dozen times before hitting send. It felt surreal, like I was watching myself burn down a life I'd spent years building. But I couldn't stop now. I just had to make it out before the smoke cleared. 2 days later, I was sitting across from my lawyer in his glass-walled conference room, watching the city crawl by behind him. His name was David, and he had the calm, practiced demeanor of someone who'd seen every flavor of corporate implosion. He didn't ask me why I was leaving, he probably assumed I was collateral damage in the scandal Derek had unleashed. "I can draft a resignation letter that preserves your neutrality," he said, tapping the keys of his laptop. "It won't imply you condone or condemn any actions. It'll just say you're stepping away for personal reasons. Will that look suspicious?" I asked. He gave me a measured look. "Everything will look suspicious right now. But you resigning quietly will draw less scrutiny than if you stay and get subpoenaed for testimony." That was exactly what I needed to hear. "Do it," I said. He nodded once, like we were finalizing any ordinary transaction. "You should know HR will still likely contact you. I recommend you respond in writing, politely declining to comment on an ongoing investigation. That's well within your rights." I exhaled slowly. My chest felt like it was wrapped in iron bands. "Thank you," I murmured. David slid a manila folder across the table. "Sign these, and we'll file everything today." My hand didn't even shake when I signed. I walked back to my rental with the strangest sense of weightlessness. Like I'd finally slipped the leash of the person everyone thought I was. The good employee, the devoted fiancé. Now, I was nothing. And somehow, that felt like freedom. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment that had led to this. The first time Derek and I shared a taxi home after a client dinner. The night we'd gotten engaged. The thousand tiny moments in between when I could have been honest but hadn't. But the time for honesty had passed. The only thing that mattered now was making sure nobody traced any of this back to me. I logged into the dummy email account, Truthseeker219. And watched as Derek's investigator tried to ping the address with legal threats. It was almost funny, in a bleak way. He had no idea how many VPNs I'd bounced that account through. How meticulously I'd built the trail leading to Karen's shell company. The longer I watched the inbox, the more certain I became that I was in the clear. By morning, my resignation letter was circulating internally. Karen was still suspended. Derek was still playing corporate crusader, convinced he was unearthing the conspiracy of the decade. And me? I was already planning my next chapter. 3 days later, Derek showed up at my rental. I hadn't told him where I was staying, but I suppose it wasn't hard to figure out. He knew me too well. I didn't open the door right away. I watched him through the peephole, shoulders hunched in his coat, hair damp from the drizzle. He looked exhausted. When I finally cracked the door open, he straightened. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice hoarse. I wanted to say no. I wanted to slam the door in his face and pretend none of this had ever happened. But some small, masochistic part of me needed to hear what he would say. I stepped back to let him in. He didn't sit. He just stood in the middle of the little living room, hands shoved in his pockets. "I thought you deserved to know," he began. "They're putting Karen on indefinite leave. The firm has already started settlement talks with her lawyers." I nodded but didn't reply. "I know you don't believe me," he went on, voice cracking. "But I never cheated on you. Not ever." "I know what I saw," I said softly. "I know what you think you saw," he countered, stepping closer. "But that wasn't me. And if you just trusted me," his eyes were shining, and for one split second, I almost felt something like remorse. But then I reminded myself that if he ever found out the truth, he'd make it his life's mission to destroy me. He'd see it as a betrayal worse than infidelity. So I hardened my face. "It doesn't matter anymore," I whispered. "I'm done." He swallowed, looked down at his shoes, then back at me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry it ended like this." And then he left. I stood there long after the door closed, feeling nothing at all. Somewhere beneath the numbness, I knew I'd never be able to tell anyone the whole story. But at least it was over. Almost. After Derek left, the quiet settled over the apartment like a heavy blanket. I spent the next few days in a strange fugue state, packing and repacking the same box of clothes, checking my email every hour even though I knew I wouldn't hear anything new. On Thursday morning, my phone finally buzzed with an email from HR. "We have received and processed your resignation. Your final paycheck and accrued PTO payout will be sent via direct deposit. We appreciate your contributions to the firm and wish you the best in your future endeavors." That was it. 5 years of my life wrapped up in 3 sentences. I stared at the message until the words blurred. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. That I felt like I'd won. Instead, it felt like slipping out of a skin I'd worn too long, only to realize I didn't know what was underneath. I spent the next few weeks tying up loose ends. Canceling the wedding venue, returning the caterer's calls, sending polite, scripted responses to the deluge of pitying texts from friends and family. "I'm okay," I wrote over and over. "I just need time to process everything." No one questioned it. No one dug deeper. A month ago, that would have terrified me. Now, I was grateful. The only person who tried to reach out more than once was Derek's mom. She left 2 voicemails and an email, each one more guilt-laced than the last. "He never would have hurt you like this. You meant everything to him. I don't know why you won't talk to him, but I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive whatever you think he did." I never responded. I knew that once I opened the door to those conversations, it would be impossible to control the narrative. Better to let them think I was heartbroken than vindictive. About 3 weeks after I quit, I got an unexpected call from a recruiter I'd spoken to the year before. "Your name came up," she said breezily. "A boutique firm is expanding their strategy group. They're interested in someone with your experience." The timing felt suspicious, like maybe Derek or someone else had tipped them off that I was on the market, but I wasn't about to question it. I scheduled an interview for the following Monday. The office was in a refurbished warehouse, all exposed brick and polished concrete. I could feel the old version of me, the one who'd stayed late in a corner cubicle to impress Derek, shrinking into something small and irrelevant. The managing partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Priya, didn't ask much about why I'd left my last job. She only said, "I'm sure you've had a hell of a year," and left it at that. By the time I left, she'd hinted an offer would be coming soon. I walked out into the autumn air feeling, not exactly clean, but lighter. Like I'd slipped one more step away from the wreckage. That night, I checked the dummy email account one last time. There were 2 new messages from Derek's investigator, both auto-generated notices that their attempts to subpoena records had failed. The Belize company was officially defunct. I deleted the account. Permanently. It felt like erasing a part of my own history. But it also felt necessary. On Friday morning, the recruiter called to confirm my offer, a salary even higher than what I'd been making before, a signing bonus, and the promise that my start date wouldn't be for 6 weeks. 6 weeks to disappear, if I wanted to. 6 weeks to decide who I was going to be when I resurfaced. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I sat in my rental apartment with a glass of wine and a blank notebook in my lap. I wrote a single sentence at the top of the first page. No one will ever know. And for the first time since this all started, I almost believed it. But a small, restless part of me kept replaying Derek's voice in my head, "If you just trusted me." I set the notebook aside and forced myself not to think about it anymore. I had made my choice. The last 6 weeks before I started the new job passed in a blur of small, deliberate choices. I cancelled the lease on my rental and moved into a short-term furnished sublet across the river. Somewhere no one from my old life would think to look for me. I told people I was traveling to clear my head, but the truth was, I barely left the apartment. I needed the quiet to come back to myself, or maybe to build the next version of myself from scratch. Some nights, I lay awake replaying every moment of the fake scandal. The night I staged the email. The hollow relief I'd felt when Derek started chasing Karen instead of me. The way he'd looked standing in my doorway, trying to hold on to something I'd already let go of. I didn't miss him. Not really. But I did miss the simplicity of believing in the person he thought I was. A week before my new start date, I scheduled coffee with Jess, a friend who'd worked in HR at my old firm. She was the only one I trusted not to spin my exit into a cautionary tale. When she walked in, she gave me a long, searching look. "You look different," she said finally. "Different how?" I asked. "Like you're not carrying something anymore." She took a sip of her latte. "Everyone's still talking about it, you know." I shrugged, keeping my face carefully neutral. I figured. Karen's settlement was huge. She signed an NDA, obviously, but word is she's never working in finance again. I pretended to look surprised. Wow. And Derek, he's still there. But it's different now. He burned a lot of goodwill. Some tiny part of me felt a pang. I hadn't expected him to stay. But then again, Derek had never been good at letting go. Jess studied me over the rim of her cup. "You know, I always thought you two were, almost too perfect." I let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah. Me too." Neither of us said the obvious, that, too perfect, usually meant something was rotten under the surface. That evening, I walked along the river until the streetlights flickered on. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jess had said. How Derek had stayed, how he'd spent months chasing the ghost I'd left behind. I told myself it didn't matter. That I owed him nothing. But I still couldn't quite shake the feeling that the version of me he'd loved had never really existed. Maybe that was the real reason I couldn't be with him anymore. Not because I'd fallen out of love, but because he'd loved an idea of me that was too spotless to survive the truth. On Sunday night, I packed my last suitcase and made a list of everything I needed to do before my first day at the new firm. Buy a new work laptop. Update LinkedIn. Change my phone number. Close out the P.O. box I'd used for the dummy email. I moved through the list like a ritual, each step a quiet erasure of the girl who'd engineered a scandal to save face. Monday morning, I walked into my new office. The receptionist smiled and handed me a branded tote bag full of onboarding paperwork. "Welcome," she said brightly. I thanked her, then rode the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The office was bright and airy, nothing like the hushed corridors of my old firm. No one here knew my story. No one would ever guess. As I sat at my new desk, I exhaled slowly. It was over. It was really, finally over. That night, I opened my notebook again. On the 2nd page, I wrote, "Sometimes you have to destroy something to save yourself." I closed the cover and set it aside, feeling, for the first time in months, like I could breathe. My first week at the new firm was uneventful in the best possible way. No tense conversations, no whispers in the hallway. Just work. Clean, compartmentalized, uncomplicated. Each morning, I woke up early and walked to the office, coffee in hand, feeling almost like a normal person again. I told myself that was enough. That if I built something new, the old story would eventually fade. But the truth is, you don't just erase the past. You just learn to hold it in a quieter part of yourself. One afternoon, about 2 weeks in, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? There was a pause. Then Derek's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. I'm not calling to fight, he said quickly. I needed you to hear this from me. My pulse spiked. I looked around the empty conference room, as if someone might overhear. Okay, I said warily. They settled with Karen, he continued. But there's still no proof she was the one who sent you those emails. The investigator can't trace it definitively. I swallowed. I don't know what you expect me to say. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I still think about you. About how fast everything fell apart. About how it never made sense. He let out a shaky breath. I guess I needed to hear your voice one more time. Even if you hate me. I closed my eyes. I don't hate you. Then what happened to us? He asked, voice cracking. What did I miss? For one terrifying moment, I almost told him everything. That I'd been so desperate to escape our life together, I'd built an entire fiction rather than admit I didn't love him anymore. That I'd chosen the coward's exit because I was too afraid of being the villain. But in the end, I couldn't. Some things just break, I said softly. Silence stretched between us. Goodbye, Derek. I hung up before he could say it back. Afterward, I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. I knew this was the last time we'd ever speak. And maybe that was the mercy we both needed. A month passed. The calls stopped. The old firm quietly replaced Karen, issued a vague press release about leadership transitions, and moved on. I moved on too. Slowly, the tension in my body eased. My days became ordinary again. Morning coffee, project plans, quiet evenings with a book and no one expecting me to be anything I wasn't. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about the version of my life where I'd told the truth. Where I'd walked away without the performance, the sabotage, the collateral damage. But then I remember the look on Derek's face when I told him it didn't matter anymore. How he would never have let me go if he'd believed there was hope. And maybe that's the saddest part. He never saw the truth because he loved the lie too much to question it. Last week, I closed out the P.O. box and shredded the last piece of paper that could ever link me to the burner phone. I walked out of the UPS store into the cold air, feeling lighter than I had in years. I'll never tell anyone the whole story. To everyone else, I was the fiancé who was blindsided, the victim who left to start fresh. And maybe that's who I am now. Or maybe I'm still the girl who would rather torch everything than admit she was afraid. All I know is that sometimes, the truth isn't what sets you free. Sometimes, the lie is the only thing standing between you and the person you can't bear to be.